Moving into the AFC North, we have the Baltimore Ravens, and we both have them as early playoff exit. Similar to the Eagles, this team, yes, they did lose. I would say they have more question marks than the Eagles because of their offensive line. And on top of that, I feel like the expectations on Lamar have not been raised high enough. I feel like they just have not been able to get it done in the playoffs. And at some point, you're going to have to point at Lamar. So I think expectations for the Ravens this year are higher than normal, where it needs to be an AFC championship or Super Bowl, because if it doesn't, then it's like, okay, how many years are we going to do this?
No, and that's a great point, and it's true. I think, yeah, and you know what? Like we agree 100%. Like, it's the bottom line is that this is a team who should make the playoffs. I'll add though, what is the most concerning? I think of any of the teams when I looked, where for sure actually of teams where we had them tiered out, like, well, they should for sure make the playoffs. They're going to make the playoffs if Lamar doesn't get injured. But what's to that point, like if Lamar were to get injured, the QB backup options on this team specifically, it's like, man, like I don't think that these guys are getting you to the playoffs. Like Josh Johnson, Devin Leary, Emory Jones, like
Whoa, don't hit
that's
on
rough.
Devin Leary.
That's rough. We're at the point now where then you have two rookies on the depth chart, and then you have Josh Johnson. And we saw how that went with Josh Johnson when he had to replace Brock Purdy in the NFC chip game. So, you know what I mean? Like, again, no disrespect to Josh Johnson. He's been in the league a hell of a long time. Clearly, he knows his stuff. Clearly, he deserves to be in the league. But coming to replace Lamar Jackson, you know what I mean? You're not going to be able to do it to the level you need to do it. And and again, to the skill positions, that's where it's tough. Like that's why I sometimes have to look in. You say to yourself, like that's Lamar's one pass. It's like this team has just never went all in, just giving Lamar his alpha. Like they've given him. They really. Oh, if you want, okay, Mark Andrews is his alpha, but again, you want to have an alpha tight end, and you also want to have an alpha on the outside, or in the slot for that matter. And as
They
much as
just
I
need
love
a
Zay
dominant
Flowers,
wide
Zay Flowers
receiver
is not.
too. They've never had that dominant wide receiver too.
Well, and also to that point, I'll even add Devontae Walker still hasn't even cracked starting on the depth chart above Nelson Aguilar as of right now. So like we're in a position where still Nelson Aguilar is your slot or outside slot, wherever he's going to play. And I don't know. Like I feel like that's a little concerning if you're a Ravens fan. I know we're still very early in the process. I get it that he's very young, but I think it just serves to the point. Like this team still hasn't given Lamar necessarily the tier of playmakers that you want to see them giving him consistently. And yes, I know I sound like a little bit of a hypocrite because, as I've said, and I will say, like the great pocket passers, the ones who can just stand back there and dial it up, it doesn't really matter who you give them; they're going to find a way to make it work. But to that point, you also then you need to have an incredibly elite O line. Ravens have a really good O line, but they've been missing a piece here or there the last couple of seasons. Hopefully, this year when you get Andrew Voorhees back from the injury from last year, when he didn't even play at all, if Andrew Voorhees can step in and be the prospect a lot of people thought he was, and Roger Rosengartner is the prospect a lot of people thought he was, this line is really good all of a sudden. And you know what? Like to your point, Lamar's running out of excuses. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, what is there to say? Like the defensive side of the ball is absolutely stacked out. That is the strength of this team far and away. As much as you have that two-time MVP on the offensive side, the real strength of this team is on the defensive side of the ball where there's not one weak position group. So with all that said, how could the Ravens not be in the playoff tier?
Moving in to the Cincinnati Bengals, we both have them as our early playoff exit. And Dobbs and I were just talking about Brad Robbins, the 25-year-old punter for the Cincinnati Bengals. And that man is 40 for sure. Because
Brad Robbins, you're lying. Like we need birth certificate checks that you're lying.
Have you seen the bench warmers where the older pitcher hands the ump his birth certificate with like a 20 in it and it says I am 12? That's what that shit is. He looks, bro. There's no way he's 25.
Man hit a scam, bro. The NFLPA is getting scammed, bro. There's no way.
But anyway, we have them both as the Bengals as early playoff exits. I think with a healthy team, this team every year should be expected to go to the Super Bowl. We've seen what they can do. We see what Joe Burrow did early in his career. You still have Jamar Chase. You still have T. Higgins. You draft Jermaine Burton. You beef up the offensive line. Yes, I understand. Like, I don't really want to play the injury scenario here because, yes, Joe Burrow has been injured, but I just don't feel comfortable with that. I think my concern probably comes in on the defensive side. I think we saw last year their defense regress a little bit. Now, obviously, they went out and got Geno Stone. They brought back Von Bell. So they really addressed an issue that needed addressing, but they lose DJ Reader. They bring in Sheldon Rankins. Trey Hendrickson is asking for a trade. I don't really know what the deal is with that situation. So I do like the Bengals to be a competitor this year for the Super Bowl. And I could see them, at their floor losing early in the playoffs. I don't really know how they missed the playoffs, though, with a healthy team.
No, yeah, that's kind of just the bottom line is, again, when there's not much to say, it's a really good thing. Like, the bottom line is, yeah, they should be making the Super Bowl when they're healthy, and that's, or not, but that sounds, you know what I'm saying? That should be the expectation for this team, as I'm sure it is in the locker room, in the meeting rooms. That's the expectation for this team. And yeah, on the offensive side, I think my concern is, to your point, look, I can talk about Joe Burrow's injuries. I'll reframe it to that the offensive line, you have a lot of guys that are getting older that also have some injury history along the lines, especially the guy you just signed. So there's definitely room for, and Amarius Mims, who literally is in the same position, even being a rookie. Like, how long is he going to stay out here? How long can we figure out a way to get him out here consistently? And then on the defensive side, I agree with what you're saying, though. Like, it kind of like we were just saying about the O-line, not necessarily the injury stuff, but more just like, you have a lot of guys that were cores of this team for a long time that are kind of getting up there in age. And again, like we were talking about with, I'm trying to remember who it was when we did a collab. One of the content creators, one of the great guests we had, was mentioning how, teams always like to, and fans of teams always like to say, like, well, it's another year. Like, they're only going to improve. Like, they're only going to get more familiar with the system.
Yeah, I remember.
But no one ever says, like, well, what if he gets older? What if he doesn't play as good next year? Like, that's a real thing in the NFL that fans never want to just consider. And it's true. Like, you only have, every player's shelf life is very different. And a lot of guys can start really, really teetering off once they get past that 29-30 range. And the Bengals have a lot of guys that are kind of tweaking right around that range right now. And it's like, I think it would just be asinine for me to sit here and be like, yep, the same old Bengals, right, defense that we've seen that can be a Super Bowl championship contending defense. A lot of these guys are getting older that were part of that team. And yes, in a perfect world, if you're a Bengals fan, yeah, these guys, right, your Logan Wilsons, your right, like all your guys, Hubbard, like, are going to still produce really well. But if they don't, you all of a sudden have a fair amount of holes on this team. And if guys, right, like, I'm blanking on the man's. If Miles Murphy doesn't make a big jump, if guys you haven't spent high draft picks on recently don't make big jumps, all of a sudden this defense could find itself in a range where you're kind of mitted out, and that's not a good situation to be in, but it's the reality. And, but again, the bottom line is you have Joe Burrow. And if Joe Burrow stays healthy, it mitigates a lot of that. But just because we got to talk about every team. That's kind of my in-depth look at the Bengals, is like, yeah, they should be a Super Bowl contending team, but there's still a fair amount of questions on this team, and you'd be lying to me to say that that's not true.
Yeah, I think that's one of the teams that I think the general concern for them has kind of gone up the last couple years, because after they lost, the Super Bowl, I don't want to say it's been downhill, but we just haven't seen that type of like play from them consistently. And obviously we know the Bengals start slow, but I really do think that needs to change going into this year. Moving in to our next team, the Cleveland Browns, you have them as an early playoff exit. I have them as barely missing the playoffs. That team to me was better with Joe Flacco playing. And Deshaun Watson hasn't had a good year since 2020. At what point, I think if Deshaun Watson does not have a decent year this year, that it's kind of like, okay, this whole thing is cooked. It has to be, right? Like, it has to be. If you did all that and you don't win playoff games and he's not your franchise guy, it was one of the worst trades ever. I think if Deshaun Watson does not play that well, because they're not going to bench him, he just did not look good, and I don't doubt their defense at all. I don't, right? Their offensive line, pretty good too. But Nick Chubb is a little bit older. He had a gruesome knee injury. Jerome Ford, yeah, he's okay. But it's like, I don't love their receiver room. And if Deshaun Watson can't get going with a kind of a mid-tier receiver room, I could see them missing the playoffs.
No, and that's completely fair. That it is, and you know what? I'll be completely transparent. Here's all it really is to me. Is I put so much faith for this tier into Kevin Stefanski. And maybe I'm overcompensating it. Maybe I'm giving too much credit to Kevin Stefanski. I just feel like what he's shown he can do, now a two-time coach of the year. I'm like, you know what? Especially when it's just more than anything, I look at this defense and I'm like, you know what? This defense is going to allow for, even if Deshaun doesn't have another good year, I think Deshaun could have a very mid to poor year, kind of how we've been seeing him play. And even with that, I just feel like, and to your point, I don't know what to expect out of Nick Chubb, but I feel like, you know what? Jerome Ford, Dante Foreman, for the scheme that this offense runs, they can still fill that hole really well, even if Nick Chubb doesn't come back and be vintage Nick Chubb, to the point where they take enough off Deshaun Watson's shoulders that even if he has a bad year, I think this team still is just so talented across the board that it's like, that's kind of just how I'm looking at the Browns. You have almost everything filled except for the QB, which it's so ironic at this point, given the trade. Like it's ridiculous. But that's kind of just how I'm looking at the Browns, where I'm like, okay, you know what? Like I would just be selling this whole roster short to not say that I don't, and Kevin Stefanski, to say that I don't expect them to make the playoffs. And the bottom line is I do expect Deshaun Watson to turn things around. I don't expect some huge Deshaun Watson Texans revitalization turnaround, but I expect that's at least the guy who can help get them to the Super Bowl. That's what I expect to see this year, because the roster's too talented for it to be anything else. And if it is anything else, oh man, we're going to have a lot of drama for the Browns this offseason. That's kind of just the bottom line.
All right, let's move the Browns to the barely missed the playoffs. Pittsburgh Steelers. We both have them as a top 16 pick. I mean, the inevitable 9-8 is inbound. Regardless, whoever you play, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, it's going to be the same record. We know what the Steelers are. Yes, I like their draft. Yes, I think they've revitalized their O-line. Yes, I think they've upgraded at OC. Do I think they improved in the wide receiver room? Losing Deontay Johnson? No, I don't. Do I think George Pickens is ready to be a wide receiver one? No, I don't. Do I think that their running back room will probably be better? Yeah, I think it will. I think their defense will probably be even a little bit better than it was last year. You know, you bring in Cam Sutton, and regardless about how you feel about him, he is good depth to have in that cornerback room, along with Joey Porter Jr. So, Patrick Queen, it's going to be very interesting to see if he can produce without being next to a guy of Roquan Smith's caliber. And TJ Watt's going to do what he does. Do I see them making the playoffs in the AFC? No, I do not. They will probably be a top 16 pick. I would bet on them being a top 16 pick more than I would bet them barely missing the playoffs.
No, yeah. And it's like, if again, you could say this for like any year recently with the Steelers, but because he has nothing left to prove. There's nothing left to prove. But if Mike Tomlin can take this Steelers team to the playoffs, I mean, it's just like, man, like this. But again, there's nothing left to prove. I would just be another year of amazing credit to add to his resume, because if Mike Tomlin wasn't on this roster, that's actually what's funny is like you have a lot of Steelers fans, you know, that are like, oh, I get Tomlin out. And your guys are ridiculous. Everyone who is not a Steelers fan sees it clear as day. Mike Tomlin wasn't on this team. You guys would have been having multiple rebuilds, multiple, right? I can't say multiple. Things would have been being rebuilt by now, right? Like there would have been a complete restart if it wasn't for Tomlin.
So here's my thing about the Steelers, Dobbs. They've been lauded for bringing in Russell Wilson, bringing in Justin Fields, right? They're both on basically 1-year contracts. So my thing is, what if neither of them work out? You're back to square one in a weak quarterback class, similar to when they were picking Kenny Pickett. And my thing is, the Falcons had the opportunity to draft Justin Fields when Arthur Smith was the coach. And the reason they did it, from what I heard, was Arthur Smith was not a fan. And ultimately, it comes down to the GM. I understand that. But we've seen how Russ has worked out with Hackett. Yes, it's Hackett. With Sean Payton, who we know is a Super Bowl winning head coach. So my thing is, and Tomlin, I guess, is too. But Tomlin really hasn't had a good quarterback since they had Ben. So I understand why this idea of having both of them looks really good on paper. But if neither of them pan out, yes, it is low risk, but it's also like you have a very talented roster and you're going to spend the next couple years looking for a quarterback unless you go to the veteran route, which you just did.
See, okay, and then no, and I agree 100%. That's what it's very polarizing. What I thought of real quick, we used to away from the camera for a second. I said I put together a little tangent. And this is really, and again, I'm sure Steelers fans right know this. Like this isn't, but it's kind of just like because I've never thought of it this way, but it makes sense when you think of it this way. And it's almost like like little side tangent here, little rant. But a lot of teams like they go to the route of like, let's sell out all of our resources. Let's sell out for one big run, right? Like it's the big run, like it's the run.
Rams are the
right?
perfect example.
We gotta win it. We gotta win it. Wait, I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I said the Rams are the perfect example.
Well, exactly.
Works,
or you could do the Jets recently. Like, you could do a lot of examples. But what's funny is, and this is where I'm going to bring the Giants into this. I think the Steelers are looking at this much like the Eli Manning Giants, where they're like, you know what? Like I'm going to look at it like this. Like, it's not about being the best team because the reality is you don't have to be the best team to win the Super Bowl. Fortunately, in the football, it's one game, and you show up or you don't. The Steelers look at it very much in their philosophy is like, you know what? We just want to be able to make the big dance every year and have a chance. And if we can win 3 or 4 games in a row, you don't have to have the best quarterback in the world. You don't have to have the best team in the world. You just got to be able to get hot at the right time. And with the coach like Tomlin, right, with the defense like the Steelers, the philosophy makes sense. And to their mind, they're like, you know what? If Russ can have a hell of a 3-4 game stretch and we can make the playoffs, we got a chance just like everyone else. And looking at it like that, I can't fault the Steelers for the way that they're approaching things because it makes sense, right? Like you could go all in and just shit the bed and you have to restart from square one, or you can just play like how the Steelers play it, where you kind of just got to maneuver a few pieces here and there every offseason, but you're always competitive, even if it's not top tier competitive. Fortunately, you don't have to be top tier competitive to win a Super Bowl because all you got to be able to do is win 3 or 4 in a row, which even bad teams can do at times. So it makes sense the way the Steelers have gone about this. I don't want to harp on it how I used to kind of the team building process is bad, because really it's not. But the reality is, to your point, is Justin or Russ going to be the guy to get them over the hump?
Right.
I don't know. Very, very likely not at this point.